I thought the road would take me somewhere new, but every turn brought me back to the same eerie crossroads. The signs changed with each pass, the trees whispered my name, and the shadows grew longer until I realized I wasn't just lost. I was trapped. It was supposed to be a quick detour, a shortcut to shave off 10 minutes from an already tedious drive. I was coming back from a late shift, the highway bathed in darkness and lined with nothing but endless trees. When the GPS suggested a turn onto an unnamed road, I hesitated, but my exhaustion won out. The road looked unassuming at first, just a winding lane, cutting through dense woods, but the further I drove, the stranger it felt. The first oddity was the silence. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing but the hum of my car's engine. The second was the fog. It rolled in without warning, thick and oppressive, swallowing the beam of my headlights. I slowed down, squinting to see even a few feet ahead. My pulse quickened when I realized I had passed the same gnarled tree twice, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I tried to convince myself it was just a similar tree, but the third pass left no doubt. I turned the car around, determined to retrace my route. Yet, somehow, the road remained unchanged. No matter which direction I turned, the same landmarks loomed out of the fog. The rusted signpost, the jagged rock jutting out from the ditch, the eerie, skeletal tree. Panic set in, as I realized I was looping endlessly. My GPS showed no signal, the map frozen mid-refresh. Then the signs began to change. What had once been simple warnings like sharp curve ahead were replaced by cryptic messages scrawled in uneven letters you shouldn't have. I blinked, sure I was imagining things, but as the road twisted onward, the signs became more sinister. Turn back now and it's too late. The radio, long silent, crackled to life. At first it was just static, but then came the voices. Soft, fragmented whispers, repeating my name over and over. My chest tightened when the whispers turned into words, my thoughts, memories, fears, all spilling out as if the road itself was reading my mind. The voice on the radio taunted me, you can't escape. You never could. I slammed the brakes when I spotted a car in the distance, its hazard lights flashing faintly through the fog. Relief surged through me as I approached, but it soured into dread when I saw the car was identical to mine, same model, same color, even the same bumper sticker. My breath hitched as I peered inside. The seats were scattered with my belongings, my jacket, my water bottle, even the half-eaten sandwich I had tossed aside earlier. But there was no driver, just the oppressive silence. I jumped back into my car, trembling, and floored the accelerator. The engine roared, the tires squealed, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. And then I saw it, something moving in the trees. Dark figures flickering in and out of sight, just beyond the reach of my headlights. They grew closer with each loop, their whispers blending with the radio. I couldn't take it anymore. When I finally stopped the car and stepped out, the air grew colder. I glanced back toward the driver's seat and froze. Another version of me sat behind the wheel, staring back with hollow eyes. The engine roared, and the car sped off, leaving me stranded on the endless road. When I first stepped into the house, it felt like a dream. A cozy fireplace in the living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, and an air of warmth that seemed to welcome me. I told myself I'd finally found the perfect home, but as the days passed, the house's warmth began to feel stifling. Doors would lock on their own, even when I left them open. The windows refused to budge, as if the house didn't want me to leave. The first time I tried to leave for work, I stepped outside only to find myself back in the hallway. I laughed it off, blaming fatigue, but it happened again. No matter how many steps I took out the front door, I always ended up right where I started. My stomach churned as I realized the house wouldn't let me leave. Then came the memories. The house began showing me glimpses of the past, its past. Ghostly figures played out scenes of heartbreak and tragedy in the corner of my eye. A woman crying in the kitchen. A man shouting in the living room. A child staring blankly out the window. They moved like echoes, unaware of my presence but haunting me all the same. One night, I found a photo album on the dining table. My heart stopped when I saw the pictures. They were of me photos I had never taken, in clothes I didn't own, with people I didn't recognize. I flipped through the album frantically, my hands shaking, until I found the last page. It showed a picture of the house, with the words "Welcome Home" scrawled underneath. I tried everything to escape. Packing my things, smashing windows, even screaming for help. But the house swallowed every attempt. It whispered to me at night, a soft, insidious voice, "You belong here. You've always belonged here." The final blow came when I discovered a journal tucked beneath the floorboards. It was filled with entries written in my own handwriting, detailing my supposed life in the house years I had no memory of. The last entry read, "I've stopped fighting. The house always wins." It started with a photograph I found in an old shoebox. It showed me as a child, smiling brightly, at a birthday party. But in the background, standing just behind my younger self, was a man I didn't recognize. He wasn't part of the celebration, he was just watching, his face shadowed, but his eyes piercing. I brushed it off as a coincidence, but I kept finding him. In old family photos, school portraits, even pictures I had taken as an adult. The stranger was always there, just out of focus, always watching. My hands shook as I flipped through the pictures, my heart racing with each new discovery. One night I dreamt of him. He stood at the foot of my bed, his face still shadowed, his presence heavy and oppressive. He didn't speak, but I woke up with the feeling that he wanted something I couldn't give. The more I searched for answers, the more my life began to unravel. Friends and family started acting strangely, avoiding me or claiming they didn't know who I was. The stranger, meanwhile, began appearing in the real world on crowded streets, in reflections, always just out of reach. It wasn't until I found my childhood diary that I uncovered the truth. The entries described encounters with the stranger, detailing how he had followed me my entire life. But I didn't remember writing those words, and then it hit me: he wasn't following me. He was part of me. The door appeared on a Tuesday. I woke up and there it was, standing at the end of the hallway, where there had always been a blank wall. It was plain, unmarked, but its presence filled me with a sense of foreboding I couldn't explain. When I opened it, I found only darkness, a pitch-black void that seemed to pulse with life. Whispers drifted from the depths, calling my name. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The room shifted with each visit. One day it was filled with childhood toys. The next it was a graveyard shrouded in mist. Each time I opened the door, I was forced to confront a piece of myself I had long buried: fear, guilt, loss. No matter how many times I destroyed the door, it reappeared, inching closer to my bedroom. The final time I stepped inside and the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers turned into screams, and I realized I was trapped, my own memories consuming me. The first time I saw the figure, I told myself it was a shadow. It was late, close to midnight, and the soft glow of the TV was the only light in the room. When I glanced at the window, I caught the outline of something, a tall figure, still and silent, standing just beyond the glass. My heart skipped a beat, but I laughed it off. Shadows could play tricks on a tired mind. The next night, the figure was back. This time it was closer to the window, and the faint moonlight outlined its shape more clearly. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a person or something, shaped like one. The longer I stared, the more my skin crawled. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I closed the curtains with trembling hands and told myself not to look again. But even with the curtains drawn, I felt its presence. It was as if its gaze could penetrate the walls, following me wherever I went in the house. That night, I barely slept. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I avoided the window during the day, but as night fell, curiosity always got the better of me. Each time, the figure was there, always in the same spot, always watching. I thought about calling the police, But what would I say? That a shadow was staring at me? Uh. One evening, I worked up the courage to confront it. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, my breath visible in the cold air. But the street was empty. The figure wasn't there. I shone the flashlight into the yard, the bushes, the driveway, nothing. Feeling a mix of relief and foolishness, I went back inside. As I closed the door, I glanced at the window and froze. The figure was back, its face pressed against the glass. This time, I saw its eyes dark, endless pits that seemed to drink in the light. It tilted its head, almost as if amused, and then disappeared into the shadows. From that moment on, the figure was no longer confined to the window. I began seeing it. Everywhere in reflections. In the corners of dark rooms, even in my dreams. It never spoke, but its presence was suffocating. My friends and family grew distant, claiming they hadn't seen or heard from me in weeks, even though I had been texting and calling them daily. One night, I woke to find the figure standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't move, but I could feel its malice. I closed my eyes, hoping it would vanish, but when I opened them, it was closer. Its cold breath brushed against my face as it whispered, "Let me in." The next morning, I found a single handprint on the inside of my bedroom window. I first heard them on a quiet evening, just as I was settling into my new apartment. The walls were old, cracked in places, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it. I paused, straining to listen, but the sound was gone. The whispers came back the next night. This time they were louder. Words drifted through the walls, muffled but unmistakably human. "Help me," the voice pleaded. My heart raced. I pressed my ear against the wall, certain it was just a neighbor. But the sound seemed to come from deep, within, like it was buried in the plaster itself. Days turned into weeks, and the voices grew more insistent. They spoke my name, recited memories from my childhood, and whispered secrets I had never told anyone. The worst part was how personal they felt, like whoever or whatever was speaking knew me better than I knew myself. One night, unable to take it anymore, I pried open a section of the wall where the voices were loudest. My fingers trembled as I peeled away layers of paint and plaster, revealing a hollow crawl space. Inside, I found scratches etched into the wood, desperate, jagged marks that spelled out a single word: run. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and that's when I saw a pair of eyes staring at me from the darkness of the crawl space. They blinked once, and then the voices roared, "You can't leave." They screamed, overlapping and deafening. I ran out of the apartment, gasping for air. When I returned the next day, the walls were smooth, freshly painted as if nothing had happened. But at night, the whispers came back. They weren't begging anymore. They were laughing. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was my imagination. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, when I saw my reflection blink just a split second after I did. I froze, staring into the glass, but everything seemed normal. Still, unease settled in my chest. Over the next few days, small discrepancies became impossible to ignore. My reflection would hold my gaze for too long or smile when I wasn't smiling. Once, I saw it glance over my shoulder, as if something stood behind me. When I turned, there was nothing there. One night, as I passed by a mirror in the hallway, I saw my reflection standing still while I walked past. My breath hitched and I backed away slowly, refusing to look again. But the mirrors were everywhere: bathroom, bedroom, even the reflection in my phone screen. And every time my reflection acted more independently, its expressions darker and more sinister. I tried covering the mirrors, but it didn't help. I started catching glimpses of my reflection in unexpected places: window panes, puddles, even the glossy surface of a picture frame. It was always there, watching, waiting. One evening, the reflection spoke. Its voice was low and gravelly, reverberating in my mind. "Let Me out, it said. I backed away, trembling, as it pressed its hands against the inside of the glass. The surface cracked, spiderwebbing outward as if it were about to shatter. I screamed and ran from the room. When I returned, the mirror was intact, my reflection staring back innocently. But I could see it now, the faint shadow of another figure standing just behind. My image. Grinning. The antique clock was a strange gift, left on my doorstep without explanation. Its face was elegant, its hands ornate, but it didn't tell time. Instead, it displayed a countdown. When I first brought it inside, the timer read 72. 72 hours to what? At first, I thought it was broken, but as the countdown ticked closer to zero, strange things began to happen. I heard faint whispers when the house was silent. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the corners of my vision. The clock was relentless, its ticking growing louder as the hours passed, desperate for answers. I researched its origin, uncovering a chilling legend. The clock was said to mark the time until its owner was taken, though no one knew where or by whom. With 1 hour left, the air grew heavy, and the shadows became tangible. They crept toward me, cold and suffocating. The clock struck zero, and everything went silent. I felt a hand grip my shoulder, and when I turned, the world dissolved into darkness. The clock reset. It now sits, waiting, its timer ticking down for its next victim. It was deep in the forest, far off the trail, that I first found it. The tree was massive, ancient, with bark that twisted into grotesque, almost human-like shapes. At first glance, it seemed like just another part of the dense woods I had wandered into, but something about it drew me closer. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to hush when I approached, or how the air grew colder, heavier. I wasn't sure why, but I felt as if the tree was watching me. As I stepped closer, I noticed the carvings. Deep, deliberate etchings covered the trunk, names scratched into the wood, each one weathered with time. I ran my fingers over them, marveling at how many there were. Then my hand stopped on a name that sent a chill through my body, my own. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The carving was unmistakable, my name, clear and fresh, as if it had been etched moments ago. I hadn't told anyone I was coming out here, so how could it be possible? My first instinct was to leave, to get as far away from the tree as I could. But something about it wouldn't let me go. It was as though invisible roots had sprouted from the ground, wrapping around my legs and holding me in place. I forced myself to turn away, to run back to the trail. But as I did, I heard it, a faint voice, soft and fragile, whispering my name. I froze, the sound chilling me to my core. It wasn't just a sound, it was familiar. It sounded like me. When I finally made it home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind, or worse, that something had followed me. The whispers started that night. They came just as I was falling asleep, soft murmurs drifting through the air, calling my name. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or a trick of my tired mind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the next few days, the tree consumed my thoughts. I couldn't concentrate at work, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the carvings. I started dreaming about the forest, always finding myself in front of the tree, its bark etched with names I didn't recognize. In the dreams, the tree would move, its branches swaying like arms, its roots twisting toward me. One morning, I woke to find dirt on my shoes and twigs in my bed. My stomach turned as I realized I couldn't remember the night before. Had I gone back to the tree? The thought terrified me, but it also confirmed something I had been dreading. The tree wasn't done with me. I decided to return to the forest to confront whatever was happening. The closer I got to the tree, the stronger the whispers became, no longer faint but insistent. My name echoed through the woods, overlapping like a chorus. When I reached the clearing, the tree seemed larger, more imposing. And there, on the bark, was a new carving, the date of my birth. I stared at it, trembling. The dates under the other names blurred together, but one thing was Clear they were all birth dates followed by death dates. My breath hitched as I realized the second date under my name was blank. The tree was waiting. As I turned to leave, I tripped over something buried in the dirt. Brushing the soil away, I uncovered a pile of objects, watches, rings, wallets, all weathered but unmistakably human. The pit in my stomach grew as I realized what they were, the belongings of the names on the tree. The wind picked up, a low, mournful sound that carried a single word: stay. The branches above creaked, bending unnaturally, their shadows stretching toward me like claws. I ran, the forest twisting around me, the trees closing in. No matter which direction I turned, I always ended up back at the clearing, staring at that cursed tree. Desperation took hold. I grabbed a rock and began hacking at the bark, hoping to erase my name. The moment the stone struck the wood, the tree let out a groan, a sound so deep and resonant, it felt as though the ground beneath me was alive. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt a sharp pain shoot through my chest. I fell to the ground, gasping for air. When I looked up, the tree had changed. My name was still there, but now the second date had appeared. It wasn't a future date. It was today. I crawled away, but the tree's roots began to move, snaking toward me. They wrapped around my legs, pulling me closer as the bark split open, revealing a hollow, gaping maw. The screams intensified, now deafening, as the tree consumed me. When I awoke, I was standing in the clearing, but something was different. The tree was still there, silent and motionless, as if nothing had happened. But as I stepped closer, I realized the carvings had changed. My name was gone. I turned to leave, only to find another person standing at the edge of the clearing, their face pale and confused, just like mine had been. The whispers began again, soft and beckoning, this time calling their name. I tried to scream, to warn them, but no sound came out. I was part of the tree now, my voice among the whispers, forever calling the next name. The room was dark, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. The stranger stood in the corner, their form barely discernible, cloaked in shadow. Their voices were soft but sharp, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. One more wish. That's all it takes, and everything you desire will be yours. I shuddered, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table. I had tried to stop. I had tried to take it all back, to make amends for the choices I'd made, but it was too late. Every wish I had whispered, every careless, desperate plea had come true. But the costs, they had been unimaginable. Friends, family, strangers whose lives I had barely touched, they were all gone now, ripped away in exchange for my fleeting moments of satisfaction. The stranger took a step forward, their presence filling the room. The shadows seemed to move with them, coiling and writhing as if alive. Their face was obscured, but their eyes, if they even had eyes, burned with a cold, otherworldly light. You can end it all. Just one final wish. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and raw. I had made so many mistakes. The lives I had destroyed couldn't be undone, and I knew, deep down, that no wish could fix it. But the alternative was worse, living with the weight of my choices, knowing that I had unleashed this thing into the world. What happens if I don't? My voice was barely a whisper, shaking with fear. The stranger tilted their head, a smile curling at the edges of their shadowed face. Then I stay. Forever. You called me here after all. You invited me into your life, and I'll stay until you wish me away. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't keep living like this, with the whispers in my ear, the cold presence lurking behind me every moment of every day. But I knew the truth. There was no escaping this. There never had been. I wish. My voice faltered. The stranger leaned closer, their form shifting and twisting, impossible to define. The shadows reached for me, brushing against my skin like icy tendrils. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I wish it was all undone. The room went silent, utterly silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, filling your head with a deafening void. And then, the stranger laughed. It was a low, guttural sound, reverberating through the room, through my bones, through my very soul. Oh, my dear. It already is. I opened my eyes and the world around me dissolved into darkness. I wasn't in my home anymore. I was standing in a vast, endless void, the air thick and suffocating. The stranger's form began to shift, growing larger, more monstrous, their shadow stretching to consume everything. You see, they whispered, their voice echoing in my mind, you were the wish. The moment you asked for me, you became everything. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My body felt weightless, as if it were being pulled apart, scattered into nothingness. Memories of my life flickered in and out, warped and twisted beyond recognition. I saw myself in the faces of the people I had hurt, felt their pain, their terror, anger. And then I realized I wasn't just me anymore. I was them. I was everything I had. Destroyed. The stranger stood before me, now fully revealed, their form a shifting, chaotic mass of all the faces I had known. They smiled with 100 mouths, their voice echoing from every direction. Now, it's your turn to wait, to listen, to grant their wishes. I felt myself being pulled into the void, my consciousness stretching and fracturing, becoming part of something infinite. I could hear the whispers now, soft, desperate voices calling out into the darkness, just as I had once done. And I knew with horrifying certainty that I would answer. The room returned to its stillness. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the only sound in the empty house. The stranger was gone, but their presence lingered in the shadows, a faint reminder of what had been. On the table sat a small black book with no markings, its pages blank save for a single line scrawled in the center. Be careful what you wish for. If you dare, share this story, but remember, each retelling strengthens the stranger's hold. Their whispers might already be in your ears, waiting for you to speak a wish of your own. Are you sure your thoughts are your own? Or has something been listening? The old clock wasn't ticking when I found it, but as soon as I brought it home, the countdown began. Its hands moved steadily, counting down to an unknown moment until I realized it wasn't marking time. It was counting down to the end of mine. It started as a whimsical find. I was at a dusty thrift shop, the kind of place where time seemed to stop when I saw the clock. Its frame was ornate, wrought iron twisted into intricate patterns. The face was blank except for 2 hands and a small display beneath it, where numbers flickered faintly. A collector's piece, the shopkeeper had said, brushing off cobwebs. I didn't. I think much of it, but something about it drew me in. When I brought it home, the numbers began to move. They ticked down, second by second, starting at 72 hours. I assumed it was a quirky timer, perhaps a feature I'd figure out later. But as the countdown continued, strange things began happening. That night, I heard faint whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, but they grew louder, forming words I couldn't understand. My dreams were no better images of dark forests, shadowy figures, and the clock itself loomed large, ticking louder and louder until I woke in a sweat. By the second day, I started seeing things. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, darting away when I turned my head. Objects in my house seemed to move, nothing major, but unsettling enough to notice. Desperate to stop whatever was happening, I tried to get rid of the clock. I threw it in the trash. But when I returned home, it was back on the mantel, ticking as if nothing had happened. Smashing it didn't work either. The moment I turned my back, it reappeared, whole and untouched. The countdown was nearing its end, and I couldn't stop the dread clawing at my chest. The shadows became bolder, no longer hiding. I could feel them in the room with me, breathing down my neck, whispering in voices that sounded eerily like my own. The clock ticked louder, its final moments echoing like a heartbeat. When the timer hit 0, the world went silent. I expected death, but instead I felt myself change. My skin turned cold, my reflection in the mirror distorted. I wasn't me anymore. The last thing I saw before the world faded was the clock resetting, ready to claim its next victim. The house was a relic of another time, its shutters sagging and paint peeling like dead skin. Past it every day on my way to work, its empty windows staring out like hollow eyes. I don't know why I felt drawn to it. Perhaps it was the strange dreams I'd been having, where the house seemed to call my name. One day I couldn't resist. I pushed open the creaking gate and stepped inside. The air inside was stale, carrying the weight of years. Dust blanketed everything, but as I moved deeper into the house, I began to notice something unsettling. Scattered among the decay were objects from my life: a childhood toy, a photograph I'd lost years ago, a scarf my mother had knitted. The familiarity was suffocating. The house began to change as I wandered its halls. The layout shifted, doors led to places they hadn't before, and the room seemed to breathe. Shadows danced on the walls, forming scenes. From my past arguments I had forgotten, mistakes I had buried, moments I wished I could undo. I tried to leave, but every exit led back inside. The house wasn't just showing me my past, it was feeding on it. Memories I hadn't thought of in years were slipping away, leaving a hollow emptiness behind. The whispers started soon after, soft and soothing at first, but growing. Insistent. Stay, they said. You belong here. The realization came too late. The house wasn't empty, it was alive, and I had walked right into its trap. I am part of it now, my memories forever bound to its walls, waiting for the next visitor to fill its emptiness. The journal appeared one rainy afternoon, sitting on my kitchen table, as if it had always been there. Its leather cover was worn, and the pages inside were blank, save for the faint scent of ink. I didn't remember buying it, but it felt oddly familiar. On a whim, I scribbled a note: find my missing keys. Minutes later, the keys appeared in the exact spot I had been searching. At first, the journal was a marvel. I wrote small requests: good weather for a picnic, a promotion at work, and they all came true. But then, things began to change. The wishes started fulfilling themselves in unexpected ways. A sunny day for my picnic coincided with a devastating drought. My promotion came only after my colleague was fired under mysterious circumstances. One night, I found a new entry written in the journal. I hadn't written it, but the handwriting was mine. It described events I hadn't experienced yet: a car accident, a betrayal, and a fire. Each one came true in horrifying detail. When I tried to destroy the journal, it reappeared the next morning, open to a page with my name scrawled across it. The entries began to describe my own death: a slow, inescapable fate that felt closer with every passing day. The journal's final words were chilling: you can't stop writing. You never could. As I pick up the pen again, I realized the truth. The journal isn't just predicting my life, it's controlling it. It began with a subtle delay. I'd wave my hand, and my shadow would lag a split second behind. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but over time, the discrepancies grew more unsettling. My shadow moved when I didn't. It stretched unnaturally long, its limbs twisting in ways that defied logic. My friends noticed too. One asked why they'd seen me standing outside their window late at night. Another claimed I'd walked past them in town, even though I was home. The shadow wasn't just acting independently, it was living a life of its own. I tried to avoid mirrors and bright light, but no matter what I did, the shadow followed. One night, I caught it watching me as I slept, its form darker and more distinct than ever. It smiled a wide, jagged grin that shouldn't have been possible. Desperate for answers, I delved into old family records and discovered the truth: an ancient curse tied to my bloodline. My shadow wasn't mine. It was waiting to replace me, to step into my life while I was consumed by the darkness. The story ends with me trapped, my vision fading as I watch my shadow walk away, living my life while I am left to linger in its place. It appeared overnight, standing where there had always been a blank wall in my apartment. Noticed it first thing in the morning, its plain wooden frame an impossible addition to my otherwise familiar space. The door had no handle, just a single brass keyhole that seemed to glimmer faintly in the dim light. At first I assumed I had overlooked it somehow. Maybe the landlord had installed it during renovations. But as I stood there staring, something about the door felt wrong, like it didn't belong. It was too perfect, the wood too smooth, the edges too sharp. It seemed untouched by time, as if it had been waiting for me. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Not that day, nor the next. But every time I walked past it, I felt its presence, an almost magnetic pull that grew stronger with each passing hour. Then, one night, I heard it faint whispers coming from the other side. My name, spoken softly but insistently. I froze, my heart racing. There was no mistaking it, the door was calling me. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices murmuring things I couldn't quite understand. When I finally mustered the courage to approach, I found a key on the floor in front of the door. It hadn't been there before. Trembling, I slid it into the lock, and the door creaked open. The room beyond was pitch black. The air was cold, stale, and carried a faint metallic tang. I hesitated, but the whispers urged me on, growing louder the closer I got. As I stepped inside, the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. My flashlight flickered to life, revealing a strange, circular room. The walls were covered in carvings, names etched into the wood, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were arranged in no particular order, yet my eyes immediately landed on one that made my stomach drop. My name. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't faded either. It looked as though it had always been there. Panicking, I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers erupted into screams, overlapping and chaotic. I turned to find the walls moving, the names shifting, rearranging themselves into a spiral that closed in around me. I screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't open. The last thing I saw before the light went out completely was my name vanishing from the wall, as though it had been erased. It started with an old shoebox of photos I found in my parents' attic. I was helping them clean out the clutter when I came across it, tucked away in the corner like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside were dozens of faded snapshots of my childhood, birthday parties, vacations, random candid moments. As I flipped through them, one photo caught my attention. It was a picture of me at the park, maybe 7 or 8 years old, holding a balloon. My parents were sitting on a bench in the background, smiling, but behind them, barely visible in the shadows of a tree, was a man. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking at the camera. He was looking at me. I didn't recognize him. His face was partially obscured, but there was something about him that made my skin crawl. I showed the photo to my parents, but they brushed it off. Probably just someone passing by. My dad said, "You know how parks are." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, I went through more old photos, searching for anything unusual. To my horror, I found him again and again. Sometimes he was in the background, barely noticeable. Other times he was closer, always watching. I became obsessed. I scanned every photo, looking for clues. Who was he? Why was he always there? And why hadn't I noticed him before? I even checked photos from recent events, and my stomach dropped when I saw him in the background of a picture I had taken just last month. One night, I woke up to the sound of rustling paper. My heart pounded as I turned on the light, finding the photos scattered across my room. The photo of the park was on my bed, the man's face now fully visible. He was smiling. The next day, I burned the photos, every last one of them. But the stranger didn't leave. I started seeing him in the corners of my vision, standing on the street, sitting at a cafe. He never got too close, but he was always there. And then, one morning, I woke up to find a new photograph on my bedside table. It was a picture of me, taken in my room, fast asleep. The man was standing at the foot of my bed. The forest had always been my escape, a place where I could clear my head and feel at peace. I knew its trails by heart, every twist and turn, every old tree and hidden stream. But one day I heard something that changed everything, a voice, faint and distant, calling my name. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind. But as I walked deeper into the woods, the voice grew clearer, more distinct. It was soft, almost melodic, and it sounded familiar. It wasn't until the voice called out again that I realized it sounded like my mother's. Confused and unnerved, I followed the voice, leaving the trail behind. The deeper I went, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew denser, their branches forming unnatural shapes. The air felt heavy, and the ground was littered with strange carving symbols I didn't recognize. The voice continued to call, leading me further into the woods. By the time I realized I was lost, it was too late. The forest had changed, the landscape unrecognizable. Panic set in as the voice shifted, growing deeper, harsher, more menacing. I stumbled across a clearing, my breath hitching when I saw what lay in the center, a pile of belongings, clothes, shoes, backpacks, all weathered and covered in moss. As I approached, I saw something that stopped me cold, my own jacket, the one I had lost weeks ago. The voice was louder now, coming from every direction. I turned to run, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees twisting and shifting to block my path. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was my name, spoken in a voice that sounded like my own. It started with fleeting glimpses, an unfamiliar face in the bathroom mirror, gone the moment I turned my head. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the light or a side effect of too little sleep. But the faces became more frequent. They weren't reflections. They were people, staring at me from inside the glass. One morning, I caught a face lingering too long. It wasn't mine. It was a woman's, her eyes wide and hollow, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. I blinked, and she was gone. As the days passed, the faces grew clearer. Sometimes they were strangers, sometimes people. I recognized people I knew were dead. They whispered things I couldn't understand, their voices muffled and distorted. I covered the mirrors, but it didn't help. The faces began appearing in windows and puddles, even in the reflection of my phone screen. I started seeing them in my dreams, their hands reaching for me, pulling me toward the glass. One night, I woke to find every mirror in my house uncovered, the faces staring back at me in unison. They spoke in a single, deafening voice, "Join us." The glass shattered, and everything went dark. When I woke, I was standing in a world of endless reflections, surrounded by the faces I had seen. I realized with horror that I was now one of them, trapped in the mirror, watching as someone else moved into my life. The room was silent now, its air heavy with a cold stillness that made my skin crawl. The photographs were back on the table, arranged neatly as if they hadn't been disturbed. Trembling hands hovered over them, reluctant to touch the glossy surfaces. Each picture showed moments from my life that didn't seem real, me laughing with strangers, standing in places I'd never been, holding things I didn't recognize. Yet, my face stared back in every image, unflinching and eerily calm. I wanted to run, but the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed in my ears, and I spun around, my heart pounding. The walls seemed closer now, their peeling wallpaper curling like dead skin. The room felt alive, its shadows shifting and creeping toward me like silent predators. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of my fear. There was no response, just the faint sound of the clock ticking backward, louder than ever. I turned toward it, its hands spinning in reverse, faster and faster. My chest tightened as I realized the clock wasn't just counting down, it was undoing something. The walls groaned, and the air turned icy. A voice, faint and disjointed, drifted through the room. "You've always been here." Um. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, I haven't. I'm leaving. I don't belong here." The laughter came next. Low and guttural at first, but it grew louder, overlapping with more. Voices dozens, maybe hundreds, all laughing, mocking me. The shadows on the walls began to take shape, forming figures that twisted and writhed, their faces blurred but their eyes burning with recognition. They were watching me, waiting for something. I stumbled back, my legs threatening to give out. The photographs on the table now showed something different me, standing in this very room, my face pale and hollow, my eyes wide, with terror. In the reflection of the glass frames, I saw movement behind me. Slowly, I turned. The room was filled with figures now, their faces warped and indistinct, but their presence undeniable. They encircled me, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. One of them stepped closer, and though its features were a swirling mass, I felt it smile. "It's your turn," it whispered. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The figures closed in, their hands outstretched. I felt the icy grip of their fingers as they pulled me toward the center of the room. The clock's ticking became deafening, each tick resonating through my skull. The room began to spin, faster and faster, until the walls, the figures, and even the photographs dissolved into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the apartment hallway, the door to the room gone. My body felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I turned to look at the spot where the door had been, but there was nothing but blank, peeling wallpaper. I tried to speak, to call out for help, but my voice was gone. I glanced down at my hands now, pale and translucent, fading in and out of focus. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't fully there anymore, like a part of me had been erased. In the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A young man stood at the other end of the hallway, holding a stack of boxes. He looked confused, his eyes scanning the corridor. He paused, staring at the wall where the door had been, as if he could feel it too. My chest tightened as I realized what was happening. The room had found its next tenant. If you dare, share this story, but be warned, the room only reveals itself to those who are curious. You've read about it now. You've imagined it. Perhaps it's already watching, waiting for its chance to appear. Are you sure every door in your home leads where it should? Or is there one you've never dared to open?